You're listening to Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. On each episode, we sit down with key industry experts to discover more about what's happening in the world of learning and development, from current trends and insights to the most valuable lessons learned along the way. Join us for a fresh perspective on all things training and the best direction forward. Here's your host, Leanne Langford.
Welcome to Learning Leader Spotlight, where we interview the learning leaders of today to help the learning leaders of tomorrow. I'm your guest host, Shanier Mershon, and I'm a relationship manager with Training Pros, the sponsor of this podcast. Training Pros is a learning and development contract staffing company. We like to say when you have more projects than people, let us help find the best consultant to start your project with confidence. I have a very special guest today. I'd like to introduce you to Adam Morettin, Group Vice President of Learning and Development at U.S. Renal Care. Welcome, Adam.
Yeah. Hi, Shanier. Thanks for having me on
Hey.
here today.
Yeah, we're super excited that you could join us. Thanks so much. Why don't we go ahead and get started? And Adam, would you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself, kind of 60-second overview of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, my formal title is Group Vice President at U.S. Renal Care. For those of you unfamiliar with U.S. Renal Care, U.S. Renal Care is the third largest outpatient dialysis provider in the world. We care for roughly 40,000 patients across about 500 dialysis centers here in the United States, as well as in the Middle East. In my role, I co-lead our learning development team alongside of a clinical partner for clinical trainings that we offer. She focuses on the clinical elements of our clinicians' roles, and I focus on the true leadership and development elements for our team members. We have about 10,000 team members that I consider my internal customer. And my end job is first and foremost ensuring that they have a great team member experience. And secondarily to that, they experience as an employer where they can grow professionally and make an even bigger impact on not only the communities in which they serve, but also their home lives as well. I've been in training and development now for about 15 years or so. And I've just sort of grown up in learning and development within the healthcare industry.
Got it. Well, that's interesting. And I think we all have our own stories, right, of how we kind of got into L&D. So I'm curious. You said you grew up in it. So tell me, what about learning and development first attracted you to the field?
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of funny. I think a lot of us might say that we slid into L&D sideways, and I would argue I probably did the same myself without even knowing it was happening at the time. But what's kept me here, I think, is what's most important, is that I really enjoy the ability to innovate and get creative as it relates to translating complex topics, big, important things that we're trying to emphasize or we're trying to translate to those who might not have ever heard of something like this before. So taking really big, complex topics and making them simple for a learner and utilizing creativity to do so is really why I stay in L&D. Another reason why I stay in L&D and perhaps one of the big attractors is making an impact on somebody's lives. I mentioned a moment ago that I wake up every morning thinking about how my work will help somebody develop from a career perspective. I think even more acutely aware, ensuring that our team members know how to do their jobs effectively, which thus impacts patient care, is another reason why I'd stay here. Now, I recognize the audience today might not be from the dialysis industry or the healthcare industry, but one of the other reasons that I stay in my role, specifically in kidney care, is I have experienced end-stage renal disease very personally. My uncle, who was like a second father to me, was a patient at the dialysis provider that I was formerly employed with, and he spoke wonders about how his care team treated him, not only at the chair side, but also related to their clinical know-how. And I wanted to be a part of that in making something special for the patients that we serve in the kidney care community.
Wow. I love that. And the passion definitely comes through in every conversation we've had that you're focused on making an impact, changing people's lives, not only professionally, but personally. And so, another kind of question I bring comes to mind is, impact, right? So what are kind of the most impactful changes you've seen in our space in L&D in the last several years?
Well, I think we'd all agree for those of us that have been around for, north of a decade or so, we used to be heavy in PowerPoints, and it required a lot of muscle to create content and a lot of subject matter expertise time. And I think where we sit today is we have this great tool called AI, where within the click of a button, we can quickly whip up coursework that creates it just as effectively as a human being once upon a time could. And so one of the biggest innovations and the most impactful changes in the L&D world, in my opinion, is the utilization of AI in our teams and how we get stuff done in a more effective way. I think the second biggest impact is not so much driven by L&D, but really the world that we live in. Bite-sized, snackable contents. I think about Facebook Reels and TikTok. Our modern workforce needs what they need now without the fluff on the to and the from, on the back and the front end. And so this ability to build out snack size learning to meet the needs of like the new modern customer, I think is a big change too. Where before we'd sit down for an hour and tackle that topic within an hour, we can now say, what does our learner very specifically need? And let's make it 5 minutes where they can listen to a podcast just like this and get exactly what they need and get going.
Right. Yes. And I've not heard it called snack size. So thank you for that. I love it. I will be using that in the future, and I'm sure some of our audience will as well.
Yeah.
So, in addition to kind of AI and the snackable concept, is that where you really see us continuing to head in our space in L&D in the next several years, or do you have any perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I shared AI and that impactful change through the lens of our ability to accelerate coursework that can then be consumed or delivered by an instructor, faculty member, or just be consumed in sort of asynchronous environment. But beyond that, I think AI isn't stopping, and it's something that learning leaders need to get comfortable with, by the way, myself included in that space. It's not stopping it, it's going to get slicker. And so I think where I see it heading is absolutely the ability to not only create content, but also interact with that content. I think about these new AI coaches that are out there where you can have a full blown conversation with I would say somebody, but it's not really somebody. It's our Alexa or Google having a conversation with us to help build muscles that we want to build in topic A, topic B, topic C. And it feels like you're interacting in some cases with an actual trainer or perhaps coach or mentor. And I think that's quite amazing.
It is. Sorry to
Oh,
interrupt you.
right.
I just experienced that in a course that I was taking, and the ability to speak to it and to hear from it and to hear another voice. It was very, very real and was very difficult. But it was wonderful at the same time. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's
I
a lot
think
of
about
benefits.
I think about the home that I'm sitting in right now where, I wake up in the morning and, my Alexa prompts me with the weather for the day and what I have on my calendar and helps me turn on the lights when the sun sets at night. And, I have my home fully integrated around my needs. And now we have tools to help us navigate learning and leverage in learning for our team members, our internal customers, whoever the audience or constituent is, to help us be better at it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so that would be one. And the second, and perhaps it's just because I feel a little behind the eight ball on this one, is equipping our learners with the learning where they are. And so mobile friendliness, evolving our ability to really deliver something that's meaningful to where they need it the most. I think is going to be a nut that we're going to have to crack in the future. And I know a lot of organizations are well along their journey to being fully mobile. And then the third nut that I don't think I've cracked yet, and I would welcome listening to a podcast just like this to understand if anybody has, is this notion of social learning. I think, when I think about the world that I live in, we live in a really highly regulated organization. And so the notion of Adam teaching Shanir something via a text or a tweet or something on social, typically we frown from something like that because we certainly don't want a bad habit to be passed around. However, this notion of social learning is one that I think is becoming more and more prevalent, and it makes sense because it matches how we live our lives as well, related to social media. So it only makes sense that it will show up here in the workplace as to how we learn things that are apropos for our jobs.
Yeah, no, it absolutely makes sense, and you're not alone in any of those, by the way. I think those are very common themes that I've heard and seen from others as well, including the social piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Yeah, so we've kind of talked a little bit about L&D overall, right? I'd like to dig into some details specifically around creating engaging, memorable learning experiences. And so when you think about designing a full learning journey that's memorable, how do you create those moments that matter for participants? Kind of what helps them really stick and stand out?
Yeah, great question. And I think we all struggle with this from time to time. And so putting aside best judgment, what I'll share in response to this one is I think what matters the most is making learning a true experience. And so to that end, how do you make it a true experience? I think first you have to make it personal, meaning it has to be targeted to the individual. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of noise in an already very noisy world. So, how can we deliver to Adam exactly what Adam needs as part of the learning journey? The second is evoking some emotion, even in a dry topic. Our jobs are really to create synapses or burn impressions in somebody's gray matter as it relates to forming that memory. And another way that we can do that is by leveraging an audience member's emotional capacity to doing so. And so triggering a positive emotion or sometimes even a scary emotion could help us burn that synapse, and mission accomplished as relates to delivering an effective training program. And then targeted. I already mentioned a noisy world. Folks want what they want, they need it now, and then they want to go about their business. I think about how I utilize YouTube videos as a for instance to fix a broken light switch in my home. I quickly go to Google and I ask Google to give me a YouTube video on how to put, I don't know, windshield washer fluid in my car because I don't do that often. Right. And 30 seconds or less, I have the video that I need. I have the step by step instruction. I've accomplished my mission. I have windshield washer fluid in my car. And two, I've now learned how to do something new rather than going to the manual in the glove box and reading through a 400-page manual in order to find how to do one simple task. And so to answer your question more targetedly, how do you make a really a full learning journey memorable and a moment that matters? You have to tie all those together. You have to have all elements. It's not just one or the other. You need to make it personal, emotional, and targeted to the learning event or whatever you're trying to really copy and paste onto your learners.
I love that. Personal, emotional, and targeted, right? Makes a lot of sense to me, and people will absolutely remember,
Yeah.
one, emotions, right? They remember the feeling, which helps
Yeah.
everything stick. And so if you think about stickiness, right? Can you maybe share a program that you've done or that you've created that's created that lasting positive memory for learners, and maybe share a little bit about the design choices that you made to make it sticky?
So I'll give you two examples. The first that comes to mind is typically utilized in group forum in an ILT world where we're all within the brick and mortar of one building. And it is an activity where folks are blindfolded, which, yes, some of you love that, some of you hate that, and all points in between. So we talk about emotion a moment ago. This could invoke positive or negative emotion, but certainly create a lasting experience. Secondarily to that, the activity itself really gathers people around a room, and together, being blindfolded, the team has to accomplish a mission with very little direction. And so for the first 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes, it's complete chaos until a natural leader steps up. Now, even as I look at your face, Shanier, saying complete chaos, as a learning leader, we really don't like chaos in our classrooms. So it takes some emotional strength too, from a facilitator's point of view. But the
Yes.
chaos is a good thing because that's how we make a lasting moment. Naturally, the pieces start coming together and the team accomplishes the very generic objective of the program, which is to share with me, the facilitator, which are the two pieces that are missing out of the complete set. Once the activity is done, time out, we then shift to the debrief, which is incredibly impactful. But before we get there, let me share a little bit about, like, summarize what I've already said. Invoking emotion, complete chaos, people are feeling uncomfortable, but they darn well remember that experience. Secondarily to that, the debrief, part two. That's when you, as a facilitator, have the opportunity to guide the conversation into how this matters to the objective of the training, whether it was building team, identifying natural leaders, communication styles and patterns, strategy, course correction. There's a lot of key learning objectives that can be extracted from it. And because you've already planted the hooks in part one of the activity, part two becomes incredibly memorable. And the ahas at the individual level and at the team level really jump quite well, and are memorable and super sticky. So, anyways, to that end, I'm not saying we all have the ability to get 15, 20 people in a room to do this, but certainly one that creates a lasting impression. And I have some great examples of when we've done this here stateside as well as abroad. And regardless of the cultural DNA of the participants, it always works every time and is a great activity.
No, I mean, I can tell you right now, if I were blindfolded in a classroom or any setting, frankly, I will remember it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I like that you tie the two in the debrief, and to your point, they're going to remember the entire experience. And it definitely would make it sticky, I would
Yep.
imagine.
Yep. Yeah, but the second example I have is probably a little less sleek and a little less fun. But going back to the points that I made a moment ago around creating emotion, making it targeted, and making it personal, we built a leadership development program along my 18 years in L&D that was very targeted. And so what we did was we had a few different components of this leadership development program. The first component was an ILT, a VILT in this particular case. And participants were asked to attend a VILT, but they were asked to attend a VILT specific to one focus area. And in this particular program, we identified key metrics coming out of our engagement survey to say, if you have a lower metric coming into the engagement survey in recognizing your team members, you would be placed on a track specific to recognition. And you'd be asked to go to the recognition VILT, where you'd focus just on that leadership competency, is another way that we can talk about this through the lens of competencies. After that VILT completed, you would then be enrolled in a learning journey, if you will, a learning stack with elements specific to recognition. And of course, we leveraged external resources for those learning stacks, but you'd have one targeted learning journey specifically on recognition, because that is what we objectively identified that you needed. Now, what makes this program specifically unique, or made it specifically unique, is it gave us the opportunity to baseline somebody going into the program specific to the recognition metric, and then allowed us to revisit the engagement surveys post program. So let's just say the next available engagement survey, whether it's semi-annually or annually, and say, did this move the needle for Adam, the person who went on the recognition track? And what we noted that there were some notable improvements of individuals when they specifically were targeted in one focus area rather than trying to take a peanut butter approach and learn everything. And ultimately, the impact mattered because it raised our engagement score, at least one of the elements of an engagement score in this case. Both programs, really proud of, love them both, and there's a lot more out there, but I could be here till next Tuesday talking about all of them.
Well, I appreciate you sharing both of those wonderful examples. I'm sure that our audience is enjoying hearing about it and thinking about things maybe a little differently that they can take away, right?
Yes, of course, of course.
And as you mentioned earlier, something I thought about was around the metrics with the what was it? The recognition, the engagement survey, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah, here.
You spoke about that, right? So I'm just thinking about that. So we've been talking a lot about how do you make things memorable? How do you make things sticky? So how have you thought about tracking or measuring quote unquote memorability beyond just like, yep, check mark or NPS? Like what kind of behavioral or performance signals tell you that the experience has truly changed minds and habits?
It's a great question, and I think there's a lot of different answers to the question, and candidly, I think as it relates to ROI and metrics, I'm probably not alone on my land. This is something that I think as learning leaders we struggle with because we tend to be more of the creative. And so put a spreadsheet in front of me, and perhaps I feel a little less uncomfortable versus a microphone. Calling a spade, it is what it is. I know myself well enough at this point to know where my strengths are. However, I would say I typically like to follow a bit of a derivation from how we classically would report on learning impact. Level one, I think we always look at overall experience in our classrooms. I don't think we're getting away from that anytime soon. But at the end of the day, does that really matter to our executives? Probably not, right? It just helps us guide the program and ensure that we're getting better and better and better. The second is proficiency. Are our learners truly understanding what we need them to understand? And so we certainly look at the proficiency as relates to testing. However, we also have utilized assessments to either benchmark or baseline our team members. And when we have programs that boast those on the front end, we will always put somebody back through that exact same assessment to see a comparison, the pre and the post. And again, I'm sure I'm not alone on that, but it's certainly a proficiency measure, one that we could use to measure the impact and the memorability of some of the core concepts that we're teaching. But the final one, and I think a great example is in behavior. And so, in that example around engagement, I mean, I think what's really great about engagement is our leaders in this particular program were enrolled in a course not based on the assessment that they took, but rather what their teams said about them and their thirst for recognition in that particular case. And so we're looking to them to adjust and shift their behaviors. And then we're going back to their teams and saying, how is Adam doing with recognition for the past year? He took a course about it last year, but now has that changed? And so the jury is also the judge in this particular case as well. And it's not just one behavior or an answer to a multiple choice question, but it's day in, day out behavior that ultimately builds up a measure around recognition again as one particular, for instance. And that's how we would gauge memorability of core concepts that are taught. And I think again, the beauty is that the measure is based on the consumer in this particular case.
Agreed. In that case, that yes, absolutely. And I've seen, I've heard of other ways that you observe it, right? Other ways, like maybe it's a supervisor observing an employee doing the actual behavior and things of that nature, right? So it's that observable behavior that I think, to your point, can help measure. Was this a good? Was this memorable? Did this make an impact? And so I think that that's where a lot of people are leaning into, as you said.
Yeah.
Maybe we do struggle a bit with that in our space, to your point of we tend to lean a little bit more creative than data and analytics, but I think we're getting there, and we're always trying.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Before I let you go, Adam, we're wanting to share all of this with learning leaders throughout the globe, and those that are maybe newer to the industry and those that are maybe more tenured, right? But
Mhm.
we always want to share information. And so I'd love to hear kind of your favorite source or sources for industry news or and information, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I attend a lot of learning and development conferences, whether they are vendor-owned meetings and conferences or industry conferences. I tend to get in at least one or two a year as investment in myself. And in some cases, the vendors are picking up some of the tab, which is always nice as well. However, what's interesting, and the reason why I bring up conferences, is that I don't learn as much by way of the content that's on the main stage, but I learn from the networking and the people in the room, the conversations that are happening at the buffet stand, around the hotel lobby bar, as a for instance, on what other individuals are doing. So I would say my best source of like industry news and ideas always come from peers and networking at events. I think a great example is even us here on the line, Shanier, learning from what other people are doing or what Adam Morettin is doing, as a for instance, for those that are listening in. The second is actually from vendors. Whether or not I'm purchasing their product or not, there is a ton of idea generation that comes from vendors. So, for instance, a vendor could be selling you an LMS. However, in their demo, there could be some thought provoking concepts that could be leveraged in the world using the tools that you already have in your back pocket or in your portfolio of tools. So I've come up with some of our greatest development programs by meeting with vendors and not even using the vendor who gave us the idea because we didn't need a vendor to execute it. And so I love leveraging vendors and getting to know what vendors are doing in the space just to create and generate new innovative ideas. So those would be my two. I know that might be different from, listening to ATD podcasts and potentially, reading the monthly newsletters, but those are definitely my biggest sources of information. And by the way, they're always a text message away too, as it relates to mind sharing with a fellow L&D friend.
No, I think it's great, and it is different than, other answers, and that's wonderful. And I would say that, as a vendor, we also one of our goals is just to help our clients and also just people that we connect with. So to your point, there's plenty of times where I've had clients who are like, "I'm struggling with this. Shanier, do you know of anybody? What are other people doing?" Right? So I would echo that and leverage your relationships with your vendors for industry information, to your point, technology, connections, et cetera. And I agree that you may learn a lot on stage at those conferences, and in general, you may or breakout sessions, but that true deep learning comes with the follow-up conversations and the experiences. And that's one of the goals of this podcast, right? Is to share what
Yeah.
your experiences are with our audience. So
Yep, I agree. Especially in the one-on-one conversations, that's where curiosity kills the cat a little bit. Meaning, I would specifically ask a question of somebody standing at that buffet line that perhaps scratch the itches that I have right now, rather than what I might hear up on stage or not hear up on stage. So
yeah,
there's a lot to be gleaned from that.
yeah, it's personal and targeted, right?
Yep, and ongoing. It doesn't
And
stop when it's
ongoing.
wheels out of the conference either.
Yeah, no, that's true. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Adam, thank you so much for joining our show today. Truly appreciate your time. I want to just express sincere gratitude to you and as a gift, just a little gift for you for being on our show today. Training Pros is going to plant 5 trees in your name.
Oh, that's really nice. Thank you. I appreciate that. No, I
Yeah.
I I hope I added value today to anybody listening in, and I appreciate it. It's always great to meet other learning leaders in the space and to collaborate. So I'm happy to be here, and hopefully our connection will stand true beyond just today's podcast.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. I truly thank you so much again, Adam, and thank you all for joining us today on this episode of Learning Leader Spotlight.
Thanks for joining us for the latest episode of Learning Leader Spotlight, interviews with corporate L&D leaders. You'll find links in the show notes to any resources mentioned on today's show. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe so you never miss an episode and leave us a 5-star review.